Good evening, BookTube. It is me, Tony from Locks to Reads. Today I'm going to do the non-fiction November book tag. I believe that's what it's called. I didn't make any notes about where I got the tag from or who put it up, so I apologise for that. But I'm going to do this. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions. I think there was one other that I just ignored, but let's just go. So, what motivated you to pick up your first non-fiction book, and can you remember it? The answer to the second question is probably no. I read non-fiction for as long as I can remember reading. I mentioned in an earlier video that my parents were once called into my school, my junior school, because they were concerned that because I was only reading non-fiction, that it would stunt my social growth, because I wouldn't have anything to talk to the other kids about. So I was reading non-fiction books from a young age. I used to read more. I used to have, obviously, I had a fascination with books about the natural world for a long time, and also books. They used to have titles like 1001 Who, What, Where's, Why, and they'd be little pages on like the pyramids or the seven wonders of the world or how jet engines work, stuff like that. So I read a lot of those. One book I do have a vivid memory of though, well, it was a book about dinosaurs. It was a big hardback with a black cover and a picture of a dinosaur on it. Now, I have tried digging around on the internet to find this book, and I haven't been able to find it. It must have come out in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was really a brilliant book about dinosaurs, fully illustrated. I suspect a lot of the information in it now is now out of date because in the 40 years since that book came out, paleontology has, well, discovered a lot about dinosaurs that they didn't know then. I did once see a copy of it on. There are some at the BFI on London South Bank. There's a series of second-hand bookstores, and I once saw a copy of it sitting on one of those stands, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, I'd really like to buy that. And I looked at it and I looked at the price and I looked at it and I thought, oh, no, I'm going to leave it, and I regret it even as I'm talking about it. Not because I think, as I said, not because I think the book's got great information in it, but the nostalgia value of it, and I'd just like to read it again and look at the pictures. But yeah, I read a lot of books about plants and animals. There was a short period of time when I really wanted to be David Attenborough. Then I wanted to be Indiana Jones. And then I realised that if you were Indiana Jones, you had to go out into the jungles and spiders and horror snakes. And I thought about it for a bit and decided that history was a better idea because you could stay indoors for that. So that's so there you go. That's a long answer to that question. Question 2: how do you choose your next non-fiction read? Partly randomly. I'll see something in the library, or I'll see somebody talking about a book, or I'll have a sudden. I sometimes disappear down a tunnel on a particular topic. Occasionally, a lot of times it's a booktube recommendation. And yeah, as I said, I'll be walking around the library or bookshop and I'll see a book that I want to read. I have some areas where I read a lot more. The First World War, as you know, the Second World War. Those are things that I've read a lot about. I've got quite interested in the 17th, 16th, and 17th and 18th centuries recently. The English Civil War, which I studied a bit at university, but again, the books I read then have probably been superseded by newer books with different theories and different information. People forget history's a dynamic discipline, and things change as people do more research, find new documents, take new approaches. So there's that. Sometimes I like the idea of book tag, um, which I wish one year I'll just do a book tag read for the whole year, which is when you read a book, and that book mentions another book, you go and find that book to read it. I'm not just talking about going through the bibliographies or whatever, but just like recommendations that way. But yeah, I find my next non-fiction reads in fairly random ways. I sometimes toy with the idea, like Remembrance reads. I sometimes toy with the idea of having themed months, but it never quite comes off. So yeah, that's my answer to that question. Number three: do you take notes and annotate non-fiction? Yes, I do. Sometimes I write. Actually, I think there's a question later about this. Hang on, let me just check before I answer it. No, I don't. Yeah, I write. I write in books. I write books with pen. I underline things with pen and pencil. I write notes. I write my thoughts in the margins. Um, I have taken to writing little apologies in the front of books now when I've done that, because I know how much that might irritate people. But it's my book. I can deal with it what I like. I have a very low um, tolerance is not the word. I I think of books as the knowledge the words they contain. I don't give a toss how they what they come in and the page. If it's my book, I can do what I like with it. If I want to rip pages out, I'll rip pages out. I don't do that, by the way. If I want to throw it across the room, I'll throw it across the room. Now, other people's books, library books, different thing. I don't obviously mark pages there. I write notes down. I have notebooks, or I put them on, or I write them onto the computer. I've never come up with a system that works for me, that I can stick to. I wish I had done. I see other people who seem to retain knowledge of what they've read much better than I do. I don't know whether that's a faction of my brain or a function of my bad annotation system, but yeah, I do. I annotate and I make notes. Four, have you read a non-fiction book that has challenged your beliefs and assumptions? A recent one I read was Paul. I was about to say Paul Foot. Is that right? I think I'm going to say Paul Foot's book, The Rise and Fall of Italian Fascism. Now, I'd previously sort of been quite. Mussolini was soft and da da da. He was quite compared to Hitler, blah blah blah, which is a bad thing to do anyway, because comparing dictators is like, why are you doing that? But this book really opened my understanding of how violent, unpleasant, and vicious the Italian fascist regime was, and how much they got away with it at the end of the war in a way that, I mean, some German fascist Nazis got away with it at the end of the Second World War, but a lot more Italian fascists got away with it, and yeah, that really changed my opinion of how I saw Italian fascism. Um, and again, as I said, it's stupid to compare not unpleasant dictators with each other, because it doesn't matter if you kill 1,000 people or 5 million people, you're still an evil little shit one way or the other. Swearing, tut tut. It's a good job I'm not monetized. Um, Five, how do you feel about the interaction of storytelling and factual content in non-fiction? I've never really thought about this. I read a lot of history, so there's a lot of narrative drive in a lot of history books. Um, I think you need to be able to tell a story. No, actually, that's right. What's wrong? You need to be able to tell a story to write a non-fiction book that I think is interesting to read. Um, Now, how you tell that, whether that story is told mainly through analysis or through narrative, is moot. But I think if your book is just a dry regurgitation of facts, then I don't think it's particularly interesting. You you need to have both. You need to be interesting to read. If you're not interesting to read, you failed. I mean, I find I can read non-fiction books about subjects I have no theoretical interest in at all if the book is well written and interesting. Um, so I think that's more important even sometimes than the subject matter itself. It's as long as if the subject matter is, you can make subject matter interesting. You can make, theoretically, you can make anything interesting. And I think one of the main jobs of a non-fiction writer should be to do that. I think sometimes academic writers, for perfectly legitimate reasons, think that actually they just need to deliver their material in as straightforward and dry fashion as possible. But you don't have to do that even at an academic level. I think you and I assume, and I think it's gone out of fact. I think now academic writers try to be write interesting work. I mean that makes me sound like I think all like because academic writers just covers such a broad cross section of people. But it's if you're writing a non-fiction book for general readers, let's put it that way, then it needs to be a good balance of story and fact. Particularly with history, there is no crime worse. Actually, that's such a ridiculous thing. There's no literary crime worse than writing a dull history book, in my opinion. There you go. Number 6. Is there a topic you wish non-fiction authors would explore? Another one to think about. I don't. There probably are, but there are probably so many of them, and they're probably being explored, and I don't know they're being explored. I regret how many gaps there are in my knowledge of everything. Science is a particular blind spot of mine, of all kinds of science. Yeah, every kind of science. I've always struggled to understand anything, especially anything that involves mathematics. I tried to read a book about quantum physics, and I really legitimately just couldn't get my head around it. And it was a popular book written by a popular sort of fiction writer, science writer, and I still couldn't get my head around it. There are huge sections of world history that I've never really gone into. I read Michael Wood's book, A History of China, which started to fill in some of the gaps I have about that Chinese history. There are huge sections. World War One, even the subject that I've read a lot about. There are so many things. The Eastern Front, I know very little about. What happened in Africa and Asia, I know very little about. For the German side of things, I know very little about. I know a little bit about what the end of the war and the German Revolution, but I don't know. There isn't enough time to know everything that I want to know. I often fantasize about reading. Well, I have a plan that I might start in 2025. It started off as a list of the sort of those Western canon lists. I turned that into a spreadsheet, and I have added more books. I've added books from Asia and Africa and other places onto it. And I've got it in publication order. So it starts with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it goes up to the present day. And I sometimes think about doing that as a reading exercise. Rereading. I've read the Epic of Gilgamesh a couple of times now. So rereading the Epic of Gilgamesh, going through the ancient Egyptian books that I've got, which is only a few because there's not a lot of published stuff that isn't academic. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Byzantium, China, Japan, Korea, but whether I'll ever do that or not is a moot point. I have two shelves of the bookshelf next to me that are organised in that date, and it ends with what's the last book on the shelf? John Locke's. Yeah, it ends with John Locke's John Locke's second treatise of government. So it goes up to the 1700s, maybe 1800s, I say. So yeah, there's loads of areas. But to answer the question, I'm sure there is, but I can't think of anything sensible to say at this point. Number 7. Do you incorporate insights from non-fiction into your daily life? I do. I almost certainly do. Mainly to bore other people with what I've learned, and occasionally for trivia machines and games of Trivial Pursuit, which is really a totally ridiculous use of all the book reading I've ever done. I mean, I've read a lot of books in my life, and it seems to be that the only good thing I could say about all that reading that I've done is that it means I win a lot of games of Trivial Pursuit, uh, which is better than nothing. Um, I suppose I got a degree in history with geography with some of that reading, but most of the time that reading goes into my head and I use it to deliver information to people who probably don't necessarily want to hear it. I'm sure people on some of the social media sites that I'm on get tediously bored with me going, but this thing is because of this thing. Yes, Plek, I'm looking at you. Um, so yeah, I do, but I'm not sure I do it in any socially useful way. Um, Final, choose just one book from your non-fiction collection to highlight. I'm going to go for a Second World War book. I should probably do a First World War one as it is Remembrance Reads, but I'm going to pick first. I'm going to pick James Holland's Sicily 43. I bought this. It's one of again. It's a rare hardback book in my collection. There aren't a lot in my collection because I find them slightly awkward to read. They look amazing on shelves. I mean, they do look great. And if you had a shelves full of non-fiction books that like in hardback, they look great. I bought this and I bought it from the site. So it is signed by James Holland and Al Murray. But you'll notice, even though that I've bent the page there, so I refer back to my lack of care of books. James Holland is a very good World War II historian. I've read a couple of his books. I have more to read. I like the way he balances the big picture stuff with the personal stories, and how straightforwardly his books cover military stuff, which sometimes you can get bogged down and confused with. But he explains everything in a very straightforward manner. Sicily and Italy are parts of the Second World War that I knew very little about. I know basic stuff, but I've never read anything on it in more detail. Also, as I've read books from earlier in Holland's career, his writing gets better, and I think he's improving all the time. This is part of it's a part of a trilogy of books about the Italian campaign. I think there's one about there's two others that I wish I checked well, but this is part of a trilogy of his books on the Italian campaigns of the Second World War, which are often forgotten in discussions of the Second World War, because the Eastern Front and Normandy and Dunkirk and other things, and this just gets forgotten in it. But it was a horrifically difficult campaign because you're fighting in a landscape that benefits defenders over attackers, even if you are superior in all ways in terms of equipment. And this book does a good job of outlining the sort of the limitations that the landscape can put on equipment, particularly like big German tanks in Sicily. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I recommend it. I'm going to read more James Holland, and I'm going to read his other Italian history books. His other books, because he's written loads now. I haven't read any of his fiction. I don't know what that's like. If anybody knows, let me know. And there you go. That's the non-fiction November book tag. This is almost 20 minutes long. I apologise for waffling, but that's kind of what I'm here for. And if you have any comments or things to say underneath, if you like this video, like it. If you want to subscribe to my channel, you're welcome to do so. That's it. Having a good night, and I will speak to you soon, BookTube. Bye bye.